Good afternoon. We will now start a new session this afternoon, and the title is Experiences of Formation to Interculturality in Male and Female Consecrated Life and in Lay Movements. Indeed, we know that consecrated life is multicultural in itself. We have to understand whether here too we can talk about a more or less gradual transition from multiculturality, which is part of the nature itself of consecrated life, to interculturality. And we know that in some religious congregations and in some societies, this is already happening. I mean, it has happened. This transition either is in progress or it has been completed already, whether in other congregations this transition has not even been thought of as yet. So we have a great variety of pathways in this sense. However, we cannot but acknowledge the international character and nature of a number of institutes. And as we were saying earlier this morning, this transition from multiculturality to interculturality are more evident in congregations, societies, and movements that have missionary, let's say, features, or that were born specifically as missionary congregations. This morning, we saw what the outcomes of this research that we have conducted have been, and we have conducted between 2017 and today. This afternoon, we will focus on a number of experiences, as the title states, but I would like to give the floor to our panelists, to those who actually will tell us about these experiences. For this reason, the first speaker is Sister Patricia Murray from Ireland. Is a member of the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, also known as Loreto Sisters. She holds a master's degree in education and from Trinity College, Dublin, a master in theology, and a doctorate in practical theology at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. She has taught at various second and third level institutions. She was a member of the Episcopal Commission for Justice and Peace for over a decade. From 1998 to 2006, Sister Patricia was a member of the General Council of her institute, and in 2009, she was appointed as the first executive director of the Solidarity with South Sudan project, an initiative promoted by the UISG and also by USG. Since 2014, she has served as executive secretary of the International Union of Superiors General, UISG, the organization that supports almost 2,000 worldwide leaders of female congregations. During the past 5 years, UISG has offered the members of religious congregations a number of workshops and seminars on interculturality, and lately also using the Zoom platform, right, Sister Patricia? And also workshops and seminars on intercultural competence, an area which, as you can imagine, is becoming increasingly important because religious congregations and ministry contexts where consecrated women from all over the world are working are increasingly multicultural. So let us give the floor to Sister Patricia. Sister Patricia, just like all our other guests, well, she has 15 minutes available in this first round, and then there can be another round, 5 minutes each. Please speak slowly to make the work of our interpreters a little bit easier. Thank you. And I would like to give you the floor, Sister Patricia, at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to speak in English, and I have a PowerPoint which hopefully will be loaded. I'm speaking about formation in interculturality for leaders and formators. And I'm looking at the challenges and best practice, and I'm looking at that in the context of female religious life. It's interesting that writers, interculturalists, have referred to the flourishing of luxurious human diversity in the human community, and so too within religious communities. Others talk about a bewildering diversity of cultures. And Sister Mary Chin, Mercy Sister in the US, refers to the labyrinth of cultures in religious life. The recent document, New Wine in New Wineskins, notes that many religious congregations, especially female congregations, have passed from almost entirely monocultural contexts to the challenge of multiculturalism. However, just because sisters live in multicultural contexts does not equip them to negotiate multiple cultures and to become intercultural. There are many challenges involved in learning how to live interculturally, but we can learn from good practice. So it takes study, reflection on experience, good, honest conversations, and time to understand culture and intercultural dynamics. And this should be part of initial and ongoing formation in every religious congregation. Understanding culture is like peeling an onion as layer after layer unfolds. Culture has been compared to the air we breathe, which we only notice when it is absent. It's the set of norms according to which things are run or simply are in a particular society or country or religious congregation or group, where the members adhere to values, attitudes, interpretations, and behaviors. Cultural identity is a very important part of a person's overall identity, because to understand and respect another person's culture is to affirm that person's identity and to acknowledge his or her dignity. At UISG, we've seen at global and local levels that we need leaders and formators who understand the dynamics of culture and the call to become intercultural in order to build community and to witness to the prophetic nature of consecrated life. Sometimes in religious communities, statements are made like, well, this doesn't apply to our province, we're all from the same culture. Yet we largely ignore local subcultures, and we often ignore age differences who have different cultures from us. We have allowed at times the congregational culture to mask instead of celebrating difference. One of the good practices that has happened in recent years is where female congregations have undertaken cultural audits. And that's to determine to what extent sisters feel respected at the level of their cultural identity. So in this type of exercise, sisters respond anonymously to a questionnaire, and it gives them the opportunity for a safe environment to answer honestly and openly. So here are some of the responses received in one such audit. I tasted a rich banquet hosted by members of the global community, and I will never be the same again. Another sister said it was an opportunity for personal transformation. For another, it was the challenge of becoming a learner and being led like a child. Another noted the tendency to stereotype others. A sister from an immigrant family said, "While most of the community are warm and welcoming, some of them are very hard to accept me in the way of my English speaking and culture. I try very hard to speak like them, but my tongue couldn't do it well." Another sister living in a predominantly white community said, "When others say I don't see colour, while the remark is well-meaning, I don't find it helpful, as colour is an essential part of who I am." And finally, another sister said, "Living in an intertribal, interracial community is hard. You can't identify the contents until you scoop into the pot and taste it." So if we're honest, in other cultural audits, members have spoken of their good experiences, but also of the hurt caused by overt or covert prejudice, generalizations, stereotypical judgments, reciprocal misunderstandings, the generation gap, personality differences, and racism. So these often are issues that take place in community life but are never addressed openly. Some practice a double approach. In the presence of members from the other culture, we emphasize the positive, one sister said, but when we are with those of our own culture, it is all the negatives about the other culture that emerge. The missiologist Aylward Shorter invites us to begin our intercultural learning by first believing in the positive character of other cultures, and then actively nourishing the desire to be enriched by them, and then welcoming those of other cultures and giving them our unreserved trust. So this is a very intentional learning. Formators and leaders, and indeed members of congregations, must be prepared to learn not only the spoken language of the other, but also come to know the different cultural signs and symbols which transmit meaning. We all know that the shake of a head doesn't mean the same thing in every culture, and silence has a different meaning and a different level of significance. So in my experience, many misunderstandings arise in multicultural communities because there is a lack of basic knowledge in understanding and interpreting the communication or behavior of a person from another culture. So cultural knowledge involves understanding the norms and communication rules of other cultures so that the behaviors of people from another culture can be interpreted accurately. Various studies indicate that most cultural awareness happens on a trial and error basis, and that the inaccurate knowledge gleaned can often have very negative results. So there are different frameworks out there which have been developed by cultural anthropologists and intercultural specialists which help us to understand culture and cultural dynamics. And I'm just presenting one framework here and very quickly outlining its scope. This is the kind of knowledge that should be learnt within our religious communities. So first of all, understanding context and culture, high and low context cultures. Then understanding the difference between an individual and a collectivist culture, what we call I and we cultures. Then thirdly, the role of power distance, how power is distributed in a culture. Fourthly, how cultures deal with uncertainty. Fifthly, the difference between doing and being cultures, or what are called sometimes masculine or feminine traits in a culture. And then the whole question of how time is dealt in cultures, how space is dealt in cultures. And very interestingly, we need to know there are many different formation learning cultures. Some who have studied formation have said that since Vatican II, there have been 9 different cultural formation types of programs, where different things are emphasized. So becoming an intercultural person is intentional. We need to go beyond mere understanding and respect for other cultures and allow ourselves to be transformed by other cultures. 2 writers that I think have much to say to us. First is Anthony Gittins, who speaks about intercultural living as a theological or faith-based undertaking. As he says, it's not about living side by side under the same roof as others, but it requires transformation or conversion of everybody involved. It's not easy, and it demands many gifts like graciousness, diplomacy, compromise, and mutual respect. And then I'd like to quote Tony Pernia, who's the former Superior General of the SVD congregation. He talks about interculturality, encouraging and promoting people from different cultures to interact with each other and therefore transform each other. And we're transformed at the individual level, but also as the community as a whole. He talks about 3 characteristics of a genuine intercultural community. The first is recognition of other cultures, but particularly allowing minority cultures to be visible in the community, even if there's only one person from a minority culture. Secondly, respect for cultural difference. That is, avoiding any attempt to subsume the minority cultures into the majority cultures. And I think this is a particular challenge for religious life. We have expected those from minority cultures to assimilate into the dominant or majority culture. And then thirdly, promoting a healthy interaction between cultures, seeking to create a climate whereby each culture allows itself to be transformed or enriched by the other culture. In other words, we don't remain the same. We're continually learning. Our cultural identity is continually changing. I have a few words to say about the spirituality that accompanies becoming intercultural. The Asian theologian Peter Phan talks about the state of marginality. And according to him, marginality is the state of being able to live in what he calls the betwixt and the between. And I think we have this kind of experience when we live in political, social, cultural, or linguistic contexts that are not our own. But I also know it's the experience of any group or person who is living at the edge, living at the periphery, living at a border or a boundary. Think of what it must be like for the refugees and migrants in our world today. So Scripture provides us with a range of examples of people who have lived interculturally, are icons of interculturality. It's worth rereading their stories. I'm not going to dwell on it now, but you have Abraham and Sarah, where Abraham always saw himself as a ger or a resident alien, and he never ceased to see himself as a stranger in a land of promise. He always saw he was the stranger, he was the outsider. Or the story of Ruth and Naomi, and we know that wonderful line, wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. And finally, the example of Jesus, the marginal person who, being in the form of God, emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, becoming in every way as we are. He was humbler yet. So this is the road we must travel. And I'll just finish, because I know my time is up, by saying at UISG we have offered interculturality training in companioning with the Divine Word congregation and their sister congregation, the Sister Servants of the Holy Spirit. We train teams of 4 to 5 people, and they in turn are core teams within their congregations. We have trained over 500 to date, and we have a well-developed program which includes many of the elements that I have just referred to briefly here. So becoming intercultural requires each of us to undertake a faith-filled journey, to become a person who respects all cultures, a person who can appreciate difference and is ultimately able to negotiate different worlds, but above all, to be transformed by them. And I would just finish with that quote from John O'Donoghue, an Irish poet. He says, "Our friends were once strangers. Sometimes, at a particular time, they came from the distance into our lives. Their arrival seemed so accidental and contingent, but now our life is unimaginable without them." Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Grazie,
Thank you, Sister Patricia, for remaining in the time that was given to you. So what impressed me the most of what you told us was that one of the words that this morning came up very often in the qualitative and quantitative analysis, there is transformation. So we keep this word in our heart, and I give the floor to Peter Claver now. He is originally from Ghana. He studied philosophy in his country, his home country, before completing his theology studies at the College of the Society of the Divine Word at St. Augustine in Germany. Also in Germany, he obtained his master's degree in supervision and counseling at the University of Bielefeld and his doctorate in pastoral psychology at the Jesuit College of St. Georgian in Frankfurt, with a thesis entitled Intercultural Living in a Religious Congregation. Since 2018, he has been coordinator for the formation of the Society of the Divine Word and for new SVD missionaries in Germany, as well as coordinator of the Overseas Training Program and Vice Provincial in Germany. He works with several congregations on topics concerning interculturality. So I give you the floor, Father Claver Nar. 15 minutes for you as well.
So thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to take this opportunity to also thank Professor Pandolfi and all those who have organized this Congress for the invitation. I hope my slides will work very soon. That's nice. So unfortunately, I'm not in the position to speak this beautiful Italian language, and so I am going to give my presentation in English. I hope you will bear with me. So the topic is the need for formation to move from multiculturality to interculturality. Interculturality is often associated with the terms multiculturalism and transculturality. And these terms are sometimes even confused with each other. This makes it necessary to understand and differentiate these terms. Even though all three terms are based on culture and describe forms of social coexistence, they differ from each other. While multiculturalism clearly distinguishes itself from interculturality and transculturality, the definitions of interculturality and transculturality are not necessarily distinctively different. They overlap. So now let's take multiculturality. Multiculturality describes forms of social coexistence of national and cultural groups. Cultural diversity within the different national groups are recognized. The individual groups are understood as independent groups with rights within the society. There is no strive for assimilation here. The model of a multicultural society primarily describes the phenomena of living side by side. When talking about multiculturalism, the focus is on living side by side to one another. Consequently, there is striving for what? For tolerance, for understanding, for acceptance, and avoidance of conflict between the different cultural groups. Multicultural approaches support the desire for cultural diversity and try to create understanding between the different cultural groups. There is no striving for togetherness here. The cultural groups meet each other with tolerance and respect, but without entering into a process of interaction or exchange with one another. There is the need to move from multiculturalism to interculturality in the formation of consecrated life. This is because a multicultural approach or a multicultural concept forms the basis for coexistence without conflicts in multicultural societies. But in my personal opinion, this is not suitable enough for formation of consecrated life, since the phenomena of mixing up with each other and the exchange of cultures and ideas are not topics of multiculturalism. However, these phenomena are central in the formation of consecrated life where members have different cultural backgrounds. And this is because consecrated life is about togetherness and not about living side by side. So what is interculturality? Interculturality refers, among other things, to encounters and exchanges between cultures, and this is very important, while preserving one's own cultural identity. Interculturality perceives and appreciates the cultural diversity of people. Interculturality recognizes that people are equal in many ways and therefore works to overcome racist, sexist, and other inhuman attitudes. Interculturality reveals how much people and cultures influence one another and challenges us to critically question our own lifestyles and cultures. interculturality sees every single person as a distinctive person with his or her own dignity. Interculturality goes beyond the boundaries of cultures and thereby also pays special attention to the diverse cultural formations within a particular culture. Birem puts it this way: interculturalism involves a conscious capacity to mediate between two or more cultures, to observe similarities and conflicts, to generate a relationship between oneself and others, and to accept the role of a mediator. The word inter in the term interculturality refers to a special form of relationships and interactions which on the level of group phenomena symbolize the development of a new culture. Finally, interculturality opens up new possibilities of perception by paying attention to the space between cultures. A redesign of a new culture should be possible in this between the cultures, in this space between the different cultures. I personally call it the third culture. This is not just about differences and similarities, but above all, about overlays, mutual dependencies, and mutual penetration of boundaries and contacts. And this is what is expected in the intercultural formation of consecrated life. To interact with the different cultures, to learn from the different cultures, to be ready to question one's own culture critically, to be in the position to see one's own culture not as the ultimate or the best culture, but to perceive one's own culture as one from many other cultures. To be willing to give something up from one's own culture and be ready to learn something from another culture or from other cultures. To be able to accept the diversity in cultures. In this connection, Thomas of Aquinas once said in his famous Summa Theologica, God loves and blesses diversity because it is part of his creation. And what about transculturality? Why am I bringing this here? Transculturality as such means that the encounter between two different or even opposing cultures can consequently lead to a blurring of the boundaries, but possibly also to the elimination of these boundaries. Even though I pointed out at the beginning of my presentation that interculturality and transculturality cannot be easily or clearly separated, there is still an important difference between these two terminologies. With interculturality, the relationship between two different positions and perspectives is emphasized more strongly, while with transculturality, more emphasis is placed on the common, both on the similarities that exist beyond cultural differences, as well as on those similarities that arise as a product of intercultural interaction. Transculturality emphasizes the similarities between cultures and the distinction between what is one's own culture and what is from a foreign culture is often no longer possible or hardly possible. Although transculturality can be seen as a concept that tries to grasp a transitional social form of coexistence and can provide valuable suggestions for shaping social coexistence, and as such, consecrated formation. Interculturality fits better into the formation of consecrated life. Because in order to treat people equally, it may be necessary to make differences. That is, to treat unequal things unequally. The necessity for interculturality in the formation of consecrated life. Interculturality means more than multiculturalism in the sense of a cultural diversity. Also more than transculturality in the sense of crossing over certain cultures. This distinction is of great importance in the formation of people in consecrated life with different cultural backgrounds, because they should not lose their own culture and identity, but bring them as an enrichment into the community. In summary, multiculturality puts emphasis on living side by side. Trans-culturality stresses what is common in the different cultures, and interculturality is more comprehensive because it pays attention to both similarities and differences in cultures. Therefore, though both multiculturality and transculturality are good bases for living together, it is important in the formation of consecrated life to move to interculturality. Because it is the differences in cultures that become a challenge and an enrichment for living together, and not the similarities. It remains a challenge to keep the uniqueness of the different cultures in a community, and at the same time to find a common way of living together. In order to do so, it is important to keep the following points in mind. Intercultural formation is an opportunity, and yet it remains a challenge that requires determination. The local culture should not be neglected, but paid attention to, since interculturality doesn't exist in a vacuum. It should become clear to all formators and those in formation that intercultural formation is a process that demands efforts, both from local and from foreign formators and those in formation. It is important to ensure that the challenges associated with intercultural formation are not unattended to, but are discussed. It is important to treat other people and other cultures and other sex or the other sex with respect. It is good to understand people and their cultures, because Henry Ford once said, the secret of success is understanding the other person's point of view. The ability to question one's own cultural values and practices is also of great importance, because as Hofstadter once said, the inability to question one's own cultural practices and values evidently creates high conflict potential when members of different cultures have to live and get along with each other. And the last statement, and I will end here. In intercultural formation, it should be possible to rephrase the message in the letter to the Galatians. Instead of the sentence, there are no longer Jews and Greeks, no more slaves and free people, no man and woman, for you are all ones, or one in Christ Jesus, we should be able to reframe it and say there are no longer formators and those in formation from America, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Oceania, because we are all one in Christ Jesus, and we are fellow sisters and brothers. And this is important, not in the sense that the individual loses his or her identity, but in the sense that living together is possible despite the different cultures. On this note, I would like to say thank you very much for your attention.
Ecco, ringraziamo veramente.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And now I would like to tell our technicians that we could not see the slides. Well, not here, but our friends following us on Zoom could not see the slides anymore. There are many, many people following us on Zoom, and they could not, unfortunately, see what was going on. Let us give the floor now, immediately, to Cristina Montoya. She hails from Colombia. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Communication and Journalism from the Pontifical Bolivarian University of Medellin and an MA in Communication from the Javeriana University in Bogota. After her PhD in Communication at Pontifical Salesian University in Rome, she started teaching courses at the Sofia University Institute in Italy. The courses dedicated to Introduction to the Dynamics of Intercultural Dialogue and Communication in Interculturalism. These are the courses she is currently teaching. She has been implementing and supporting communication projects for social change and development, coordinating workshops on participatory culture and active citizenship, as well as creating and implementing formal and non-formal educational projects. She was also a visiting professor at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin, Colombia, and at the Institute of Ecclesiastical Studies, Felix Varela, in Havana, Cuba. And we are very happy to give you the floor. Well, I'm kind of short. I'm having a hard time reaching the mic. No, I'm kidding, but probably you cannot see me on the screen if I don't move. Well, I would like to thank you so much for having given me the opportunity for being here with you this afternoon for us here, morning for those who are following us from other parts of the world. And also because it was wonderful to learn so much from the research that was presented this morning, by the way. In the broad landscape that was outlined by the contributions that we heard in these last few days, I would like to add to this picture, to that landscape, a small fragment that brings into focus what is happening within new charismatic and prophetic movements, as is the case with ecclesial and lay movements. Knowing how different they are from one another. But I will mention one in particular, which is the Focolare Movement, with a global presence, basically, a global reach. And I might say that in some way the Focolare Movement could be described as one single global pedagogical project with a specific focus, learning how to live together. But more specifically, I will talk about its newly established university, the Sofia University Institute, which is in the same county where Florence is. The Sofia University Institute was established in 2008, and it collects, on the one hand, the legacy of educational experiences of the Focolare movement, but also the work of some scholars who are active in the fields of politics, economics, and theology. The aim is to offer an educational pathway that reconciles thinking and life experience. But even more so, we would like this to bring us to achieve wisdom. The nature itself of the first academic offering of the Sofia University Institute makes us think. It's a master's degree in the culture of unity. Although, right from the very beginning, we could see that this university is very multicultural, but actually we are in the very initial stages of an educational ecology in intercultural formation that is capable of unleashing and cherishing intercultural formentis. Now I would like to basically express 5 different voices in my speech, because I would like to refer to the experience of some students, a number of students, and I would like to let them speak, and I will just relay to you their own words. I perhaps highlight some elements that actually stand out and that are part of the spiritual legacy of the Focolare movement, and that could be useful also in acquire formation in interculturality in higher education. And I will refer to words that have been mentioned already over the last few days, that are identity, basically, meta-communication, recognition, and a shared horizon, let's say. I like to speak with like pictures, basically, and I would like to then paint out for you pictures, like paintings that basically to explain my views. This first painting or picture, I would call it the surprise, and it refers to identity. The question about our own identity, this was the case for me, at least. But this question becomes urgent in the often painful experience of otherness, when we discover something that's other near us, who expresses himself or herself in a difficult way for us to understand, who act differently, who tell a story of the world that starts in a different way, using different words, highlighting different characters and names. And when someone challenges what our certainties have always been. So the first experience in this kind of situation is surprise. At Sofia, we can see this happening immediately, both in the life of our resident students and professors. They all come from different parts of the world, and even more so in class. And at the end of the course, during the discussion of his dissertation, Anton from Burundi said this. During my first year of my master's degree course, during the intercultural communication class, the professor asked a Hungarian student if she identified herself more as Hungarian or as European. Without hesitating, she replied, "I feel more European than Hungarian." Antun said that this answer was quite surprising, because the concept of identity had always been very narrow in my own understanding. It meant something that was very close to me, like my family, my country, my culture. Europe seemed like a huge continent, which to me actually, for my Hungarian classmate, was something that was close to her, to the point of actually signifying or representing her identity. And I would like to underline that to Antun this experience was so powerful that it has changed his life in a way, and he started becoming engaged in African integration of his African peers. He started working within a network of young people to understand how to make sure that each of these separate peoples in Africa could feel African first. And I'm still within this first theme of surprise. The relationship must be put at the center of education. Knowing that, as Pier Paolo Donati has said, we need cognitive assessment and symbolic operations that are relational in nature and that are able of establishing a circuit of mutual gifts. Right from the very beginning at the Institute, a proposal is made to everyone that characterizes the Educational Pact and that could be expressed in these words by Chiara Lubich. I felt that I was created as a gift of love for you, and you were created as a gift of love for me. This means opening oneself to a positive relational, let's say, network of mutual recognition and esteem. And in this case, this is facilitated by the places of encounter and listening. At this point, identity is revealed as a dynamic reality. If we could express what the pace and rhythm of the relationship between formators and students is, basically, it's not that you are because I am, but I am because you are. And this is at the center of our relationship. It's a mutual commitment of co-responsibility and esteem. This seems to me to be the first, let's say, strong point that we have identified along our path. But this is not really that spontaneous. It is supported specifically by a space that everybody knows as a space for sharing. Twice a week, the academic community, both, let's say, administrative staff, teachers, students, everyone actually, we all gather, and we are usually inspired initially by a passage from the Bible or a sapiential text from other cultures, and we are all called to react to this. And also, everyone should find the courage to make their voices heard in reacting to this text, to this passage. In this way, at least in interpersonal relationships, some asymmetries are corrected and are broken that might characterize academic experience. And in this case, this is the joyful experience of reciprocity in diversity. And I'm using here the words of a student, a Muslim Yemeni student, a married woman, and she just obtained her PhD in pedagogy. And she said, the most important thing for me was this reciprocity, both with other students and with the professors. Being a Muslim myself, I was able to give my contribution through this experience of encountering and sharing, a contribution that was appreciated and welcomed as something positive, just as it was for me to listen to others, their thoughts and experiences, always within the framework of mutual respect, knowledge, and enrichment. Let us move on now to this third, let's say, picture that I would like to share with you. Recognition. I want to be basically pervaded by the question that comes from the other. And in this case, we have to engage in decentralization, which, as Portera said, implies a serious investment in the area of empathy, understood as the ability to put oneself in other people's shoes without losing ourselves, but keep remaining in touch with our own selves. Then we have to experience both internal and external congruence and an unconditional positive acceptance of ourselves and others. And this is a quote from Portera. And in this respect, I would like to share with you here the voice of an Australian student. Caroline tells us that it was at a meeting on the establishment of human communities in the digital world. It was this meeting that was a very powerful experience for her. While the American professor emphasized the latest frontiers of artificial intelligence and wondered about the role of technology in individualization and also the issues related to cybersecurity and privacy, and some students from Madagascar, just speaking in a very low voice, started asking questions that seemed to be kind of unrelated to the issue, and this caused some kind of unease. This was the question they asked. But then, where do the poor and marginalized people, where do they fit in this big picture of digital revolution? And Caroline had studied sociology and mass media, and so she basically let herself be imbued and pervaded by this question. And from this question, her further studies actually ensued. Recognition in the digital world. So not only recognition as a subject of academic study, but rather seen as a vital experience of extending our gaze and receiving reality through the other who is different and who is the bearer of a different context, then this, to her, has become a challenge related to knowledge and existence, openness to new questions, which means openness to dialogue. This is one of the elements of intercultural formation, that is promoting a relationality that it makes us, allows us, to have a more complete and complex outlook on reality, to favor, as Martha Nussbaum said, the development of a rationality that allows us to read the role of our own nation in history and implies a better knowledge of ourselves, and in a particular way, the critical capacity and the inclination towards self-criticism. And so we can distinguish what is essential to our cultural practices from what is instead superfluous. I only have 1 minute left, so this is why I'm speaking so fast. But I would like to mention this last picture, that of the shared horizon. It refers to what I said in the very beginning. The fact that we are looking for wisdom, this is what we're looking for ultimately. An element in education to interculturality at Sofia University is the shared search for a common horizon that should emerge from the continuous interweaving of thinking and life between reflection and implementation, and leading us to an evidence and a life that enlightens us. And to use the words of the young Argentine theologian Luca Cervigno, this should give shape and should trigger knowledge that springs from the participation in the ultimate foundation of reality. This third culture, which was mentioned earlier, which is this horizon of wisdom. Once again, I would like to quote the words of a student who said, this interweaving between thinking and life allows us to realize that we are taking part in a project that's bigger than we are, that goes beyond our limited way of looking at things. We mostly learn to look at relationships, the relationships that were there before us, and to look at relationships as an horizon that should be recovered and found in everything, in other people, in society, and in our everyday lives. And I would like to move on to instead the challenges. If we state, as Gardner did, that intercultural education aims at the promotion of all intelligence, of all students who are present in the classroom, so bodily, kinesthetic, musical, social, interpersonal, intrapersonal, emotional, transcendental, aesthetic intelligence. Well, we cannot fail to recognize that our universities were established primarily in a European cultural matrix, a Western cultural matrix that is modern, centered in a type of rationality, in the spoken word, in writing, in transmission, which is centered around the individual. And therefore, universities still struggle to understand the tribal man who is community-centric, the symbolic man and woman, those of emotional intelligence, those who express themselves using mostly images, tears, and hymns or songs. So in my opinion, we need formation processes and also reflection processes that are still very powerful. We need new practices and new languages that basically apply to all forms of teaching. And in the evaluation and assessment phase, they should take into account also the processes and not only the results. And they should highlight the connection between concepts and the life of society, for instance. Perhaps this can be encouraged if within research groups and also within the faculty and within also the administrative staff, the multicultural dimension is more present. But especially if we promote that kind of reflection that allows us to deepen the intercultural dimension, but even more so if this truly becomes a strategic priority for our universities. Anyhow, we might think that the universities can be a privileged place for the formation to interculturality. And let me finish with the words of that student in conclusion. Both life and thinking here lead us to deconstruct useless constructs and constructions that each of one of us carries at the level of personal life experience, the structures of thinking and cultural conditioning. Things that we find out are very cumbersome, and they're obstacles until they are transformed by the encounter. Thank you so much.
Allora, grazie ai nostri...
Thank you very much to our guests. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the interventions online and in presence because Professor Pandolfi and Professor Montoya, no, Professor Ottone want to propose a practical exercise in the form of a workshop, so we give room to them. So thank you for your contributions, and we go ahead with the next part of the session, with the workshop. Okay. Greeting to all of you, also to those who got connected in the last few minutes, and those who are in full morning. Good day to everyone. There are more than 400 connections in the afternoon. Many get connected from Latin America or North America, and so it is morning for them. And there are others who are in the evening if they are in Asia. So it was an experiential contribution. The speakers have grasped the reflection that started from a series of best practices with contradictions, efforts, projects, etc. So we'll do a workshop now. We'll do it in the following way. For those who are online, so now we'll get those who are here in the room can take the chance of Professor Ottone, who will move to the room behind, and with those who are here, we'll do a small workshop, put into practice some of the dynamics that we studied today and were part of our pathway on the ground, so research, action, formation. So I invite all the Italian-speaking people who are here to go to the room 3, who is here behind us. Those who remain here in the room and those who are connected online instead will interact with Tim Norton, that I will introduce, a missionary of the Society of the Divine Word, who has a very long experience in formation to interculture in religious congregations. I invite Tim Norton to come to the table of presidency. It's hard to introduce Tim Norton because his past is very interesting. He was born in Sydney, Australia, and he worked as a physiotherapist, and he took care of the psychophysical well-being of persons, and especially of people marked by suffering, by disability, both in personal terms and also as a group. He joined the Society of the Divine Word, and he, from Australia, then he went to work in the popular neighborhood in Mexico City. So that was the other side of the ocean, as you know, where he served marginal communities and popular communities in Mexico City. In his experience, he realized what was the complexity of the plurality of the difference between teachers and formees, and he became a specialist in accompaniment of the community of consecrated life in facing with the participatory method these dynamics. That's something he's still getting into now, but it is a sign of hope that a few days ago he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Brisbane in Australia, and as he says, it is a small diocese, one of the smallest dioceses of Australia, but it is big as the whole Ireland. It has 3 million inhabitants, this diocese, and that's also Australia, you know. This continent, continent that looks like an island, like a big island. So there are aboriginous populations, and also called indigenous, a pre-existent population to the arrival of the British, and also great immigration also from Italy in Australia, and also many Asians, etc. I have a brother of my grandfather who went to Sydney. So Australia also lives a reality as a melting pot that requires good management. So we are going to have this workshop online and with those who are here. It will not be very easy. I don't know if someone of you decided to move with Professor Ottone. That would be nice. It's free, of course, yeah, and spontaneous, yes. So, Professor Ottone, we have her in Italy, so especially for the congregations who work in Italy, that could be interesting. While the communications of Tim Norton are interesting also because he listens to us here and in the rest of the world. So I give the floor to Tim. So I can anticipate that we cannot open the channel of Zoom for the interventions, but the chat is, it is possible to write what you think, and here we can read it and interact in this way. So I give the floor to Tim Norton.
Hello, everyone. As the introduction said, I am from Australia. So, like everybody in the world, I have an accent. And what was my Australian accent has now become an international accent. So I hope you can understand my English. I also hope that the slides are functioning this time, because there are some photographs there, at least online as well, if possible. So in coming to you today, I come from a community. We are 7, and as all good SVD communities, we are from 7 different countries, and most of us have worked and lived in yet other countries. So one of my confreres, I use the word my brothers, my confreres, is from Ghana, as is one of the speakers today, another of my brothers also from Ghana. And when he goes on home leave, his sister gives him clothing for us from Ghana. We are all shapes and sizes, and the clothing that John brings to us sometimes is clothing that we can wear and feel comfortable in, and sometimes not so much. But this that I'm wearing today is a fugu, it's a fugu. And so it is used for celebratory occasions in Ghana. I have two. And one of the questions I ask myself is, when can a Caucasian man like me wear something like this? Not just because it's cold, but when do I have permission to wear something like this? Now, I have permission today from my brother John from Ghana. But as we move across cultures and live with people from different places, it's one of the many questions that arise for me. In New Zealand, for example, there are some very complex tattoos that Maori men, indigenous Maori men, have. And there are reasons behind that, cultural reasons. But those tattoos have now become quite popular with Pakeha or Caucasian New Zealanders, or even in Australia. And really, those people do not have permission to use those. It's not culturally appropriate, just because I like it. And just this week, the anti-vaxxers in New Zealand felt that doing the haka, a traditional Maori warrior dance or presentation, was appropriate. But the Maori community have complained and said, don't try to take our haka. I would not try and take anything from one of my Maori brothers. They're big boys. So this workshop informed this afternoon, today, is a chance for you to think of your own story. I will tell a little of my story, and the reason behind that is to invite you to do the same. So your intercultural stories. So earlier today, Pat Murray was saying that this journey from multiculturality to interculturality where do I? This journey from multiculturality to interculturality takes study, experience, good, honest conversations, reflection, and time for understanding culture and intercultural dynamics, a complex learning process. And I would add to that a very, very important part of this is my personal experience in interculturality. And all of us have some. Even back when we were much younger than we are now, maybe we sang in a choir, or we played sport on a team, or even in the workplace. We found ourselves sometimes with people who were different to us. Can we remember what that was like? Professor Pandolfi said that I trained as a physiotherapist, and that is true. When I trained, the majority of physiotherapists in Australia were female. And the first hospital job I had, there was a staff of 36 physiotherapists. It was a large hospital. There were 3 new graduates who were men. I was one of them. The rest of the staff were women. So as men, we would sometimes gather and not talk about the women, but talk about how we were managing an environment that was principally feminine. We've all had some of these experiences. The literature will tell us that one of the most important features of interculturality is that it is intentional. And yet some of our experience has just happened in our earlier lives when we were not so focused on what interculturality is and is not. When I was 15 years old, my parents took me and my sister for a holiday by the sea. There's a lot of sea around Australia. But my father had recently purchased a car. And so we drove to the next city to the north. It's called Brisbane, actually, and it's 1,000 kilometres from Sydney. And a little further north are some beautiful beaches. And so my family stayed in a small apartment on the first floor. And on the ground floor, there was a woman with a boy in a wheelchair. My mother was a social worker, and my mother, probably like the mothers of most of you, insisted that my sister and I go downstairs after supper to play with that poor boy in the wheelchair. Neither my sister, who is younger than me, nor I were very excited about this, but like most of you, we did not say no to our mother. So we went downstairs after supper and we met this woman and her son. And my sister and I still have memories today of what a wonderful evening we had playing games with that woman and the boy. The boy was the same age as me. The next day, I could see out the window that the mother of the boy pushed the wheelchair to a path by the sea, and she left him there while she went to do some shopping. She went to the supermarket. I was curious to get to know this boy. So I walked towards him and I felt nervous, even though I had met him the night before. Now it was just us. I didn't really know what to say. I sat down on the path beside him, and then he started the conversation. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. Now, believe it or not, that is me with my friend Russell. At this time, we are both 21 years old. I was studying physiotherapy. And you can see that I'm holding on a train. I'm holding a rail with one hand, and I'm holding the arm of his wheelchair with the other. I don't remember who took that photograph of us, but I was doing what friends do, I guess, and just making sure he was as comfortable as he could be. I learned that Russell had never had a friend, a good friend, who was an able-bodied person. And I had never had a friend who was not as able-bodied as me. Now, I've learned from Russell that the words we use to describe one another and our abilities are important. And our disabilities, those words are also important. So I would say the terms I might use in English sometimes are not so easy to translate. So we may stay with the fact that I am an able-bodied person and he is a person with other abilities. In getting to know Russell, and we remained friends for life until he died 15 years ago, I learned about another world. I was studying and looking for a job in a hospital. He, on the other hand, who I believe was significantly more clever than me, was very limited in his work options. And he worked in a small industry that was created just for people with other abilities, or people who lived in wheelchairs, people who had problems with their arms, their legs, their bodies. He deserved better. We took long drives in my car when I went to visit him. And as young men do, we drank too much beer. He had the courage one day to ask me to help him in the bathroom. So it was easy for me to go to the toilet, but it was not easy for him. So I remember thinking, is this the end of our friendship? Fortunately, I think my training in physiotherapy was assisting me, but suddenly this was very personal. And I did help him. So we drank more beer that day, and some other days as well. We went to pop music concerts. Sometimes we ate in restaurants. We visited his friends from boarding school. None of those children were able-bodied. And his friends from his workplace. And as I learned, all of his friends were not able-bodied like me, except for me. And I came to realize that all of my friends are able-bodied, except for him. So I was gradually moving into his world. And as Peter Claver said, interculturality is not being side by side, it's being together. So as young men do, we talked about love and sex and marriage. And he often said how lucky I was, because I would fall in love with someone and get married and begin a family. Then Russell met Patricia, and I went to the seminary. Life rarely goes in the direction we imagine it may. Russell subsequently asked me to be at his wedding. I was a novice at this time, and fortunately the novitiate was very close to his city, and I, as a 26-year-old novice, was given permission to attend his wedding. And so in Australia, the custom is that one person in the wedding party is called the best man. And so I had the job of carrying the rings. And men do not often talk about the quality of our relationships. It's not common, and I think that's across the world. But the fact that he asked me, and not his best friend from school, Peter, who is also in the photograph, or the man behind Russell, who was a maintenance man at the school, and he was friendly with Russell. That alerted me to the fact that, yes, my feelings of being a really close friend of his were mutual. As I said, we never put it in words. Men, mostly, we don't do that. When I was ordained a priest in that city called Sydney at 1,000 kilometres from Brisbane, Russell and Patricia travelled 1,000 kilometres to be with me at the celebration, and I was able to introduce them to my able-bodied friends from high school, friends from university. No, there's nobody there that's bald, so it's one of those people with hair is me, just to make sure here, so you're clear. That journey for them was one of the longest journeys they had ever done, and they stayed with me for the 2 weeks around my ordination. So apart from trying to manage some of the details of the ordination, I spent the most of my time with them and taking them to the houses of my friends, most of which were almost impossible to enter with a wheelchair. So when you live closely with someone who doesn't have the same abilities, you begin to learn how unfriendly the world is to those people. Russell and Patricia did what they said they would never do. They had a child. It was not their intention to do that. They had a daughter. Her name is Erin. And I will never, this is a beautiful photograph. I will never forget the way Russell looked at his daughter. I will also never forget watching Patricia change the nappies or the diapers of Erin, holding Erin with her feet on the floor and changing the diaper with her mouth. And those big pins that they used to use, she managed that with her teeth. She also carried Erin through the house by her mouth, holding the diaper in her mouth, like a mother lion, really. And Patricia, to this day, has trouble with her teeth because of that, but she's never regretted it. When she was 3, Erin took me to the sitting room to show me her new doll. She asked me to follow her, and I did. We went to the sitting room or the lounge room, and the doll was on the floor. And Erin, who is able-bodied, picked up the doll and gave it to me so I could look at it. But what was remarkable was the fact that she picked up the doll with one foot while balancing on the other and gave me the doll with her foot. Now, why did she do that? Because that's what she learned to do at home. That was the culture of her home. I was moving between two worlds, the world of people who are able-bodied and people who are not. And I was learning the skills to negotiate that world. This is over a period of years. And I'm looking back on that now as an intercultural experience, a deep experience of interculturality, not in theory, in practice. This is life experience. I didn't know I was being intercultural. But some of the characteristics of interculturality that I know now were present in me. I was curious. I took risks. I took time. And I thought a lot about my interactions with Russell and my interactions with Russell and Tricia as they let me into their lives. As I said, I was not just an able-bodied man who was sitting near them. I was an able-bodied man sharing their lives. And I believe these are important steps in interculturality. And I think we all have these stories. So I'd like to think about the early part of your lives. What experiences have you had of entering the world of the other? One of my colleagues, Roger Schroeder, who was working for some years in Papua New Guinea, uses the term of entering someone else's garden. So I'd like you to take just a couple of minutes in silence to think about your personal experiences in the earlier part of your lives, experiences you've had of entering into the world of the other. So ideally, in a workshop, in small groups, you could share some of these stories if you shared a language with the people in your group. That's a little more difficult today, but I offer this to you as a style of activity you could do in your communities. The idea of this is to make interculturality a little more personal. It's somewhere in all of us, and it's been given birth in all of us. Some perhaps have used it more than others. And some of us in our intercultural relationships arrive at that point where Russell asked me to help him go to the toilet, and we stop. And the fact that I went forward doesn't mean I'm any better than anyone else. But relationship will often do that for us. It will move us into spaces that are new for us, are risky, and are challenging That's interculturality. Just as a side note, as I mentioned, Russell died 15 years ago. And Patricia happily married again. I was best man at that wedding too. But Patricia has always been a very introverted person. In fact, when she met Russell and they began their relationship, Patricia found it very difficult to relate to me as a person who was close to Russell. I remember having to take some steps back from the relationship. But with time, she came to accept me and to love me. The difficulty that I find Tricia an introvert, but she has had people staring at her all her life. And so she keeps stepping away from people. So whether she's an introvert by nature or an introvert by culture, I wonder. Now I'd like you to move into your more contemporary lives, to think about your present life situations. This may be your community, the people that you share life with, your family, perhaps. All superheroes, all doing God's will perfectly. But perhaps this is a little more like your community. This is certainly a little more like my community. We are people who are fat and thin, we are tall, we are short, we are different colours, we are from different places, we have different skills and different limitations. Some of us are more able-bodied in some activities, and some of us are less. Intercultural community, she didn't know it, but Mother Teresa said something rather helpful for intercultural living. You can do what I cannot do. I can do what you cannot do. Together we can do great things. Together we can do great things. This image is of a woman called Maureen Mcbride. Maureen was the Superior General of the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions. 2 or 3 years after finishing her term of 12 years in leadership, she very sadly died in a car accident. But prior to her death, she came to 2 interculturality workshops that we were running in our house in Nemi outside Rome. And she had some very interesting things to say about the skills needed to lead. And she put it in multicultural communities. I would have called it these skills to lead in intercultural communities. And one of the things I like about her list is that it is short. Listen creatively. Understand what is new. Model what is possible. And the last one is the best one, and we do not do it nearly enough. We should do a lot more of this. Rejoice in our differences. We are different, and it's so often we look at this as a problem. But in fact, many, many times, it's reason to rejoice. Maureen went on to say that it is important for us all to think broadly about our differences, not just in ethnicity and nationality, but, as Peter has already mentioned, in gender, also in generation and personality. And in our communities, in Christian life, generation and personality are particularly important, I believe, as differences where we should have some level of focus. For example, of the 6,000 Divine Word missionaries in the world, 1,500 of us were born in Indonesia. And so the majority of our new missionaries moving around the world are Indonesian. But they are young Indonesians. And so the communities that receive them will often give characteristics to these new missionaries, and they will call them characteristics of Indonesians, completely neglecting the fact that these men are sometimes 40 to 50 years younger than the men who are making this statement. The generational differences are important, and we need to be clever to try and manage them. She also said, very importantly, that leaders, formators, are all called to be good listeners, not just to the people they are leading, but also to the Spirit that guides. And of course, we are constantly asking the Spirit to be with us in our Christian lives and to give us impulses and insights and strength. And we can ask that same Spirit for all those things in our intercultural lives and mission. So this is a quote from Tony Pernia, and Patricia Murray mentioned him, a previous Superior General of the Society of the Divine Word. And so giving some good theory about interculturality, which encourages and promotes people from different cultures to interact with each other and therefore mutually enrich and transform each other, transform the individual and transform the community as a whole. So in this next section, which won't go for too long, I want you to think about your more present lives and the intercultural natures of your present lives and some experiences. I will give you two of mine and then have a little time in quiet so you can think about yours. So back in Australia, I was asked to work with a provincial council of a woman's religious order and around culture in particular. The provincial, a Polish woman, was the youngest of the five. She was 45 years old. There was another Polish woman who was 46, and two women from the States and one from Australia, and they were in their 70s. And I was struck by the respect that the older women afforded the younger woman in her role as provincial. They were very, very respectful with each other. I was really happy to see that. So the older Australian woman, her name was Margaret, told me she had a problem at home in the community, a cultural problem, with a younger Filipina sister. Her name was Leonie, the younger woman. And both of these women lived in a community of two, and they were teachers at a local Catholic school. And Margaret said that she really cared very deeply for her sister, but there were some cultural issues that she was struggling with, and she asked if I could help. So she said that when Leonie, the young woman, prepares the evening meal, Margaret can't recognise the food. She doesn't know what she's eating. And she said when Leonie, the younger woman, prepares the morning prayer, Margaret has never heard the music or the songs before that Leonie likes. And when Margaret, the older woman, prepares the evening meal, Leonie sometimes arrives just before supper with another teacher. And Margaret has only prepared supper for 2, not for 3, so she has to quickly put some more things in the soup. So I was thinking, okay, the younger woman, she likes different music, she likes different food, she's spontaneous in her relationships. It seems to me that there's something more than ethnicity going on here. So I said to Margaret, how old is Leonie? Well, Leonie is 36, she said. And I said to Margaret, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? She said, I'm 76. So I suggested to her perhaps this was more a generational issue than the fact that one was Australian and one was from the Philippines. And she insisted, no, Father, it is a cultural issue. She's Filipina, I'm Australian, that's our problem. Okay. So I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I can help you any further. So we went for coffee break. When she came back from coffee break, she said, I have 2 sisters, and they both have daughters about the same age as Leonie. And they often complain to me about their daughters, just as I was complaining to you about Leonie. She said, I actually think it is generational. She is a young woman, I'm an old woman, and she has things that she likes, and I have things I like from my generation. And I said, well, that sounds like it could be the case. And then she said, and this is the important part of the story, she said, I have really good relationships with my nieces. I listen a lot and I understand them well. Could I perhaps use some of those same techniques with my religious sister? And I said, why not? That sounds like a plan. And the important thing is, Margaret now has a plan. Before, she had no idea what to do. But now that she's noticed that there is also an age difference as well as an ethnic difference, she, on her own, has a plan of action. Now, it may work, it may not, I don't know. But she could move forward. So it's important that in our intercultural lives, we're not just looking at one another's ethnicity or nationality, that we are looking a bit deeper than that. And another story, more recently, I was asked to do the general visitation or the canonical visitation of my congregation. So my Superior General asked if I would go to one of our European provinces. And happily, I was there for 3 weeks, meeting my brothers from a variety of countries. I met one young Vietnamese confrere, and he had only been in the province for 2 years. The province was Spain, and his Spanish was still rather poor. On the first evening I was there, he asked me to come to an adoration service and a mass, and this was in honor of Padre Pio. So I was unaware that Padre Pio had such an international fame, but of course he does. And so we were on our knees for 1 hour in adoration with a number of parishioners. And then we had the Mass, of which he asked me to be the celebrant, the principal celebrant, and I happily did that. So it was a very traditional way of liturgy. The next day, the provincial asked him to take me into the city where we were staying and show the beauty of the city. So he took me on the metro train. And when I asked him a few questions about himself, he seemed reluctant to share much with me. But I have had that experience with some of my brothers who were raised under communist regimes. So I understood that. It's okay. Took me to the city. He said, "That's the cathedral. have you been inside it? I said, well, I was here once before, and yes, I have. He said, good. That is the bank building. This is the Plaza de los Toros. And then he took me across the main bridge of the city. And just going over the bridge, there is a almost hidden stairwell. We went down those stairs a long way down to the river. And there by the river were the homeless people. And he introduced me to maybe 10 of them by name. And they all knew him as the Chinese pastor, even though he's Vietnamese. But we had long conversations with these people. And I was quite moved, really, by the fact that here he was told to show me the beauty of this city. And he showed me the poor people. For him, that's the beauty of the city. And I was struck by the fact that here is a young man in a new culture. And he is using some very traditional forms of liturgy that he learned in the seminary. And certainly that's traditional and very valid. But then his pastoral activity is extraordinarily progressive, moving straight to the poor. And in my experience with my brothers, it's not always easy to identify the poor in another place. But his parish priest told me he was there within weeks of arriving. And he takes those same parishioners who are in the adoration with him. And so not so much that surely he has his own intercultural story. This is an intercultural learning for me again, that my brothers have this capacity to hold ambiguity or to hold differences that I don't have, and I need to develop a lot more than I presently have. So with those two stories, I'd like you to take again just a couple of minutes to think about your present realities in interculturality. One or two experiences that are significant for you, and why. So I would love to hear some of your stories, and in a workshop I would undertake that part of the exercise, and perhaps you can do it one day. But for now, I just want to emphasize once more that interculturality, if we are to pursue it intentionally, needs to be personal. It does not remain in the area of characteristics and interesting theory, although the theory is very important. It needs to be personal. And I shall borrow that quote that Pat Murray used from John O'Donoghue. Our friends were once strangers. Somehow, at a particular time, they came from the distance into our lives. Their arrival seemed so accidental and contingent. Now, our life is unimaginable without them. Grazie.
Non sono Sor Patricia.
I'm not Sister Patricia Murray. I'm not a professor either. While I was listening to Tim speak, I was thinking about the fact that his words have been so compelling, but I believe that also silence was equally compelling and eloquent. Silence that we're all invited to engage in, but also the silence with which he interspersed basically his reflection and his life experiences, I would say. Well, I believe that work on interculturality, the research that we carried out in the last 4 years, have brought us to meet many people. Even the organization of this conference has led us to meet so many people and listen to them and know these people. We started getting to know each other and opening new pathways and new roads. And this also left us some moments of silence. Our research was interrupted by lockdowns and COVID. These silences were moments in which we reflected on the things that were happening. I hope that this will continue for us in the future as well. We have to be open to listen to words that nourish our silence, a silence that is conducive to meditation, which will then lead to action in life. So we have to have moments of silence that will allow us then to leave some space for other words to enter into our hearts and our minds. I would like to thank all the people who have participated in person and virtually. And I will see you tomorrow morning at 8:30 Rome time, 8:30 a.m. Rome time, to continue and also basically wrap up the session dedicated to words and reflections on issues related to interculturality as a horizon that is in front of us and that's inside of us and that needs to interact seriously with formation. So organizing intercultural moments in which we learn how to be ourselves and be in the world, a very rich and important moment when we are aware, because I think that interculturality is something that we experience every day and we're not always aware of this. And we should also have moments for formation that seriously help us to grow in our human skills for interculturality and to build a new culture where there is room and space for all cultures and all the different generations. So thank you so much for your kind attention. I would like to thank Tim Norton for his wonderful contribution. The people he mentioned, the stories he told us that enriched his story and our story. And so I bid you all farewell, but I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Sorry, 9 o'clock. I've been told that it's 9, not 8:30. So 9 o'clock, so we can sleep for an extra 30 minutes. So hasta luego, goodbye, arrivederci.